Hello, everyone. Welcome to Democracy for America's Night School. This specific one is Building Reflective Democracy. We are just about 4 minutes away from getting started. Traditionally, we usually start these right at the top of the hour, but we'd like to make sure people have an opportunity to join in, and we'd like to make sure we greet people when they come in and not just show up last minute. It's a night school. Having a professor show up right when class starts, not very effective professing. So we're here early. We're starting class a little early. I'm excited to be here with everybody. My name is Alejandro Chavez. I'm just doing the pregame here to make sure that we all have someone that is greeting us when we walk in. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, so you may actually hear from behind me an air conditioning. I know some of you have gotten snow still. I got a little bit of too much heat, so I need air conditioning. I do apologize for having great weather, but it happens. So we are just about 3 minutes away from getting started. This is a fantastic call with some of the best people around the country. I'm excited to be here with my colleagues, and we're going to get a chance to meet them. So if you're just joining and you're wondering, what is this guy talking about? You are in the DFA Night School. This particular one is called Building a Reflective Democracy. For those of you who joined us before, we had one last month called So You Think So You Want to Run for Office. In just a minute, we're going to get started. So please be patient while we get started. We got about 2-3 more minutes. So grab some water, grab a pen and paper. Grab some paper. There will be an opportunity to ask questions. So when you do, know that we're going to answer them at the end of the call. So you'll have a little box where you can ask questions, and we'll prompt you throughout the call. We have a little slide that even shows you how to answer or ask a question. When we do, we're not going to reply right away, but we will get to it at the end of the call. We have a good chunk of time set aside so we can do that. And for those ones we're not able to get a hold of, we will definitely make sure that we are able to try and respond later. All right, we are about 1 or 2 minutes away from getting started. This is exciting stuff. This is the DFA Night School called Building Reflective Democracy. This is a great opportunity for so many of us to get together and talk about things that are important. My name is Alejandro Chavez. I'm a electoral campaign manager here at Democracy for America, and I also am kind of ringleading this call right now until we get started. We're a minute away, so please be patient while everyone's joining on. Right now, if you can look at my screen, it looks a little bit like a little Vegas slot machine with the number going up because people keep jumping on. Or if you're a bingo person, it's a different bingo number every couple of seconds. So this is exciting stuff. Okay, we do like to respect people's time, but at the same capacity, we like to make sure we have as many people on the line when we get started, so that way people aren't just like, what happened? I came in kind of late. Am I in the right place? So with all due respect to everyone's time, we're going to give it another minute before we get started because people are currently jumping on, and we want them to have an opportunity to say, hey, Alejandro, what is this? And I will tell them this is a DFA Night School, Building a Reflective Democracy. This is one-of-a-kind training that you're going to get nowhere else. And for so many of you that have done these before, welcome back. And for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, welcome to class. I hope you're ready to learn some fantastic stuff from a few of our instructors we have, our coaches we have with us tonight. All right, we're a minute past the hour, and I think we should just go ahead and get started. With no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Brianne Fisher, who's going to get us started. Brianne, it's all yours.
Thanks, Alejandro, and welcome everyone to DFA's Night School, Building a Reflective Democracy series. My name's Brianna Fisher, and I'm the social media manager at Democracy for America, and I'm from Houston, Texas. Tonight's call is going to be one of several night schools to build a reflective democracy. Don't worry if you feel that you might miss a part of the series, because we'll record them and make them available to everyone on our website, which is www.democracyforamerica.com/night school. Again, that's www.democracyforamerica.com/night school. So over the next hour, you're going to hear from my coworkers, Mondell Robinson and Annie Weinberg, who are going to lead you through a training on defining reflective democracy and how we can make it happen in America today. Then we'll hear from our special speaker, Mayor Stockton Michael Tubbs, and at the end of the call, we'll leave about 15 minutes for questions and answers. If you'd like to ask a question, you can do so in the panel on the right-hand side. Again, of your webinar toolbox. Sorry. Again, the panel is on the right-hand side of your webinar toolbox. For those of you joining us for the first time, DFA Night School is an online campaign skills instruction where some of the savviest campaigners in the movement lead you through virtual trainings on field strategy, volunteer recruitment, coalition building, and power mapping, paid and earned media and messaging, finance planning, and grassroots fundraising, and much more. So right now, I'm going to turn it over to my coworker, Mondell Robinson.
Thank you. Even today, in the spring of 2017, there's still value in Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Whether he believed it or not, the most important value of that speech was to be true to the idea that we as a nation should be committed to a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. These words have a lasting effect on my belief of what democracy must look like and how it should be carried out. As a black man born in the sweltering heat of what was supposed to be a more progressive South, free of Jim Crow and all of the ugliness associated with that era, I cannot begin to explain the importance of a democracy that includes as many varied people as are in the society and at similar rates. I am Mondell Robinson, and tonight I have been tasked with defining reflective democracy. This training is not mere academics, for we know at the core of defining reflective democracy, we also find a cure for what has and is ailing America, and address to centuries of bigotry. When we have a shared understanding, then we all should be able to advance our democracy in some way. So we must be crystal clear when defining reflective democracy. Reflective democracy, in the simplest of terms, means the institutions of this country must reflect the demographics of this country, their expenses, needs, and demands. To anyone who understands the definition of democracy, this may sound circular in that a democracy itself is a form of government by the whole population, or at least eligible members of the state, typically through elected representatives. America has for too long made democracy accessible only for the wealthy white privilege, and this has happened at the expense of every other person living within the man-made borders of this nation. It is nearly impossible to imagine the true greatness that could be this nation if all of our political genius was recognized, when no one is deemed superior or inferior. Me, for instance, I am the grandson of a sharecropper, and my dad had to stop his schooling in 3rd grade to work on a farm that was neither his nor his father, all while the white man that owned that farm not only allowed his children to continue their education, but he also gave them complete dominion over my father and his father. Sharecropping existed in the South because of political policies passed by all white Southern legislatures in direct response to the freeing of slaves. Alejandro is the grandson of a farm worker who spent his best years fighting for humane working conditions for Latino farm workers and for higher wages for those same farmers. And he became the leading Hispanic civil rights activist. Alejandro's grandfather was challenging issues and policies of the status quo, a status quo that lacked diversity. I argue both of these and many other inequitable situations are only possible in an environment when one group of people is left to govern for everyone. The scope we use to govern must be as wide and diverse as the people we seek to govern. If we had blacks as elected officials in the era after slavery in the South, do you believe sharecropping would have been allowed? If we had Latinos as elected officials in California between the 40s and the 60s, do you think Mr. Chavez would have had to fight so hard? If we had more women as elected officials, hell, the entire system would be better. I'm just gonna throw that out there. Right now, I'm gonna use a sports analogy, and I hope I'm forgiven for it, but I think it points out the insanity better than most at the way we do politics in this country. Let's say ESPN and every other sports radio was only allowed to hire Dallas Cowboy fans, and the only thing we read about was the good news about the Dallas Cowboys, which came from the home office of Dallas Cowboys. And all the bad news was about how Dallas was being treated wrong. Do you believe in this circumstance that the other team's needs would be articulated properly? This is almost the unthinkable insanity we submit to when we don't advocate for a more reflective democracy. None of us has the capacity for thinking like all or any of us. And the best way for us to get closer to a more perfect union is to have a more diverse democracy. Somewhere in Middle America, somewhere in the Northwest, and definitely in the place of my birth, the South, someone is saying, why is Mundell talking about the problems of the 60s and race? Didn't we just finish 8 years of the nation's first black president? Didn't Breonna and DFA just send an email touting the election of a list of women of color to the Senate that DFA supported? My response to you, silent questioner, is yes. All that you mentioned is true, but none of your points eliminate the shortcomings we still face as a nation. Are you aware that of our legislators, 90% are white? And of that population, 65% of them are white men? Did you know that one of the most powerful positions in our judiciary system is the district attorney, who has the power to decide on who will and will not be sentenced to prison? Did you know that recent surveys have shown that over 95% of district attorneys are white? 95%. And black women are less than 1% of the district attorneys in this country. This plays out in California better than most places. Think about it. Whites are a minority of that state's population at about 38.5%. But they make up more than 70% of the state's prosecutors. The Latino community, on the other hand, is the largest population in California. Now, consider the fact that California is a border state, and you have 70% of that state being represented by the prosecutors that are white, who lack the scope and lived experiences to represent the majority of the population, especially since Latinos are only 9.4% of the state's district attorneys. Only 9.4% in a state where they are the largest population. Can you imagine that none of the members of the board that voted on what would happen at the sacred grounds of Standing Rock were of the Sioux tribe? This is not reflective. There were no black women in the Senate to speak up about the shortcomings of the Affordable Care Act. That voice was silenced because of a lack of diversity. Did you know that the United States Senate is 81% white? But that's about par for the course, considering that 90% of the elected officials in this country are white. There's another disturbing aspect to the way we do politics in this country. It does not seem directly linked to making our democracy more reflective, but I am more than convinced that it is equally damaging to our body politic. In Brown is the New White, Steve Phillip paints the effect of the conventional wisdom by giving several examples, but none more damning than when he explained that the Democratic campaigns, the infrastructure and institution associated with the Democratic Party spent a whopping $514 million on political consultants in 2010 and 2012. 97% of that money went to white consultants. 83% went to white men. Let me say that again. The big tent party spent 97% of their consultants' monies with white consultants. This alone tells people of color that whites know better about your lived experiences than you, or that your issues only deserve 3% of their funds. People. And if you did not, it did not get any better. I'm sorry. It did not get any better in the next election cycle, because in 2014, the same institution spent 97.9% of their funds with white consultants. I think it's important that we note that in these years, as a party, we did not have net victories. And in most cases, we actually lost pretty bad. Has anyone on this call taken a look at the demographics of the Senate staffers? Because it matches the information I just presented. And it also is another key example of what's wrong with our democracy when it lacks diversity. We know people of color are 36% of the United States population. And we make up more than 28% of the people that are old enough to vote. But we are only 7% of the top staffers in Senate office. These roles are charged with making key decisions about constituent services. Yet, they lack the cultural competence and the lived experiences to speak fluently to the very people they are set to serve. Another colorful example that Steve laid out in Brown is the New White was about a campaigner named Rita Hamida. Rita was trying to build her list of voters that she was going to push to the polls in the closing days of the election. Her being Arab American knew that there was a significant Middle East population in Orange County. That number was actually about 3.1 million. So she went to those in charge of technology and data, a white consultant, and requested a list of Arab American voters in the district. Do you know that that consultant gave her a list of only 5,000 names? Rita, having the lived experience and being Arab American in Orange County, knew that this list was way too small. So she asked if she could get access to the voter file. So as she decided to compile her own list, and when she did, Rita identified 62,912 potential Arab American voters. Part of this was because she knew that folk from her community not only considered themselves as Arab American, some of them thought themselves Syrian Americans, Iraqi Americans, Iranian Americans, and etc. Do you know also the candidate that Rita was supporting and working for won by only 15 votes? 15 votes. I wonder how many elections in 2010 and 2012 could we have won if we knew more about the people of color in those districts? How many more elections could we have won in 2014? How different would the White House look right now if we valued people of color's input and lived experience? Listen to me. We are our best when the we includes every. Until we are at a more equitable position as it pertains to who sits in the comfortable leather chairs in elected offices up and down the ballot, from ice-frozen lakes of Wasilla, Alaska, to sun-scorched sands in Miami, Florida, we are obligated to seek and speak these truths that are self-evident. Thank you. I am Mondell Robinson, and I'll now turn it over to Annie for her expertise on campaigning in a manner that will definitely produce a more reflective democracy. Annie, take over.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mondell. Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you, Brianna. And thanks to all of you for joining us on this beautiful Thursday evening. I'm really honored and excited to be here to discuss this critical thing. So as Mondell outlined, the current makeup of our elected officials and governing bodies around the country is not yet reflective, and that can often result in policies that are reinforcing white supremacy. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about what that looks like and what that means, but I want to also just remind folks that you can definitely ask questions, and you can use the little chat box that you use to download in GoToWebinar. And I would like to put out a call right now for folks to just think a little bit more about what a reflective democracy would look like in your community, if that's what's happening right now for you. If you think about your elected officials, your mayors, your city council members, just think about some of those folks that are leading and governing right now. Is it reflective of your lived experience? Is it reflective of your needs and values? How would things be different if that were more or different for you and for the people that you love? So you can share some of those stories and you can ask some of those questions in the chat box, and we're going to have a bunch of time to make sure we answer them at the end. With that, let's talk a little bit more about campaigns. So we know that this is not just about candidates and elected officials. Folks probably remember this photo. I'm sorry to make you all look at Paul Ryan's face. He took this selfie with all the Republican interns, and it was just a blinding wall of whiteness. And lots of Democratic operatives and progressives tweeted about it. So as Mondale outlined, a lot of institutions that are on the Democratic side are not reflective either. And you may be asking, why is that a problem? There are lots of awesome white progressive candidates, and there are lots of awesome white progressive campaigners. I actually personally identify as an awesome white progressive campaigner. Here's why it matters. It matters because some of the best and brightest leaders in the movement aren't getting the decision-making power over where money gets spent, what candidates get prioritized resources and funding on the map, who's electable and who's thought of as too challenging, what questions are asked in the polls that then go on to determine ads and messages for entire campaigns. And it means that the experiences and strategic vision of people often leading some of the most critical work in communities around the country aren't in the room when the strategies to reach out to those communities are being made. So it's not good enough to just not be that in that selfie. We got to make big changes within our democratic institutions if we're going to turn the Democratic Party and our candidates into vehicles for progressive transformation. This isn't just an ideological problem either. It's a terrible strategy for winning stuff. It leads to a cycle of disenfranchisement, and as the story about Rita Hamida shows, it means the Democratic Party, we're just running some dumber campaigns and losing more elections. So I'm going to walk us through a little bit about what that disenfranchisement cycle looks like and some of the assumptions that have been made throughout a couple different cycles that lead us to where we are now, where we've lost over 1,000 seats at the state and local level. So here's the conventional wisdom, right? It's that you got to take your likely voters and focus on a demographically tiny pool of wealthier, white, usually right-leaning swing voters above everybody else. And lots of campaigns then assume that the support of voters of color and progressives are the base. They're just going to come on board. Then the next assumption is, okay, so tailor all the campaign messages and mailers and ads to that tiny pool of white right-leaning voters, and then defund the tactics like voter contact that communicate effectively and welcome in everybody else. Then train Democratic candidates to prioritize that pool of voters above everyone else and to be fearful and cautious about campaigning with strength and clarity about racial and economic justice, and use that rubric to define what districts are winnable, what candidates are electable. Then, in many scenarios, white right-leaning swing voters sometimes show up at higher rates in those hot races, perhaps because they've had entire campaigns and candidates built for them. And at the same time, we've seen that voter turnout nationwide is hitting some devastating lows, especially in critical midterm elections where likely Democratic supporters, folks that are likeliest to share core values around progressive power, around fighting structural racism, around fighting for income inequality. Fighting income inequality, we don't want that, right? Too many folks are believing that the process is too rigged to make a real change in their lives and the lives of people they love. And we know that turnout matters. So looking at turnout, in the next image, the map, there's a map in 2016. Whew, gnarly. If 2016 voter turnout had been just the same as it was in 2012 in Milwaukee, Detroit, and Philadelphia. So again, if it had just been the same in Milwaukee, Detroit, and Philadelphia as 2012, Donald Trump wouldn't be president. Hillary Clinton would have won. So we know that investing in organizing, investing in turnout matters deeply. But the beautiful thing is that we actually know what we have to do to reinvest and rebuild a reflective democracy and break this cycle of disenfranchisement that we're talking about. So DFA won 64 races on November 8th last year. High five virtually to all of you, the folks on the phone. Yes. We elected some transformative leaders up and down the ballot by using these tools. So I'm going to go through a few core principles of how to do that. And I see that some folks are asking questions in there. Please keep the questions coming. I'm excited to talk with you more about all of them. Again, if you're looking for where you can ask your question, just go to the webinar chat and go to webinar, and you can type it in, and we'll do our best to answer everybody towards the end of the call. So building these tools that I'm about to outline is the heart of our 2017 strategy. I'm going to use an example, one of our favorites, someone that I think a lot of you know and love, Keith Ellison, now the congressman from Minnesota and the deputy chair of the DNC, because his model of campaigning really underpins a lot of the core principles here and the pathway to victory. So Keith Ellison was campaigning in a district that historically had pretty low turnout, and in the phase between 2010 and 2014, statewide turnout across Minnesota actually declined. But in his district, it went up. He's nearly doubled voter turnout in his district over the course of time that he's been elected, and that is awesome. And it is not higher math or rocket science or luck. It is because he was using these principles. So let's go now to look at sort of the first core principle I want to outline. And I'm going to start by just naming some conventional wisdom that holds us back from doing this. So there's some conventional wisdom that says, okay, voter contact doesn't work. Just, knock on some doors in the final few weeks and spend the rest of your money on massive TV buys. But voter contact doesn't really work over the long haul. Here's the truth of it. Here's what we got to do. We have to prioritize and invest in organizing. And that means conversation-based voter contact operations early and consistently. I know many of you have been on the phones with the DFA dialer. We made 300,000 calls, plus or minus, for Kansas's 4th congressional district just earlier this week. A race that shocked and terrified Republicans, where Republicans were supposed to win by 31%, and we brought the Democratic candidate, James Thompson, within a very close margin. And a lot of that was because of real conversations with voters. So a great contact operation doesn't just mean a canvas in the final push. It means going out on doors and phones year-round, listening to what voters care about, tracking that data very rigorously and consistently over time. And it means that we use what those voters are saying to show where is a campaign succeeding and connecting and where is it falling short so that you can adjust accordingly. Okay. Next, let's talk about voter targeting models. So there's some conventional wisdom that says it is always, 100% of the time, easier to persuade a very consistent voter, someone who shows up no matter what, to vote for you, rather than to mobilize folks that are slightly less likely to vote to the polls. Sort of a best practice underpinning a lot of campaign assumptions. One more time, that's that it's always easier to persuade a consistent voter to vote for you than to mobilize those who are slightly less likely to actually get to the polls. And you can see how over time that would be cyclically disenfranchising. So here's what we got to do instead, and here's what Keith Ellison did to expand voter turnout in his district. We need to build expansive and inclusive voter models that, yes, do persuade consistent voters and also respect and reflect the needs and demands of the rising American electorate. Keith saw that even as he was looking at his pool of really consistent voters, that you need to expand to new voters in order to run up those margins and win. And you need to reach out to folks who maybe only show up in a general, maybe have never voted in a primary before. So that also means using polls not as predictions, but as one tool in the toolbox. Because we know that this is an art and a science, it's not just one. And actually, it's such an important art and science that our next night school is going to dig into the nuts and bolts of exactly how to do that, how to build your win number, your base, your persuadables, all that wonderful stuff. All right, I got three more for you. There's a conventional wisdom that says, okay, it's an off year, down ballot elections are just kind of practice runs for these marquee fights that are really important, 2018 Senate, 2020 presidential fights. Here's the truth of it. There's no such thing as an off year. We got to invest in local elections now to build up a successful 50-state strategy. That means we got to engage in municipal races, in state and county races, in prosecutors' races, some really critical district attorneys' races happening right now. That is how we're going to elect more transformative leaders. It's how we're going to prove to voters that are unsure if the electoral process is rigged and can make change in their lives that it can. And it's how we're going to build up a new pipeline of progressive leaders so that we have elected bodies that reflect the great breadth and depth of Americans. The future senators and presidents are running for school board right now, right? And we got to trust that our opposition, a lot of the bad guys, have a really good plan for theirs. Keith Ellison recruited and mentored a whole pool of Minnesota legislators, love a lot of them, and it was through his leadership and theirs that they were able to fight a terrible voter ID law and defeat it. They were able to win marriage equality in the state legislature. They were able to do a whole bunch of amazing stuff. No such thing as an off year. All right. Next conventional wisdom. A lot of folks say, you hear Beltway pundits say, to beat Republicans, Democrats need white working class voters, and those voters are never going to identify and support candidates of color. These assumptions are centering whiteness at the expense of everybody else, and it means that some of our best and brightest superheroes are not getting access to the resources they need in the halls of power. So what we all must do is center and invest in and trust the leadership of people of color, from candidates, but also to staffers and to voters, and root out that white supremacy from our electoral institutions and get rid of the gatekeeper networks and barriers to access that prevent too many people from running and winning and leading. Okay, which brings me to the last core point that I want to open up for discussion and for questions. There's an idea that you hear often, and if folks on the phone and on the line have run for office, you may have heard it yourself, where people say, you can't actually run on that, you can't talk about that, you can't be that. Right? So I bet a lot of you running for office or with candidates that you've endorsed and supported, if you're part of our DFA groups, have heard that about people that you admire and that you want to just have governing right now. Here's the truth of it. Here's what we have to do to build a reflective democracy. We have to run on our core values, not away from them. We have to run with courage and conviction for racial and economic justice, for our real progressive values, from the big decisions to our little decisions. We got to show people what we're fighting for. Keith Ellison is a perfect example of that. He never shied away from who he was. In fact, he campaigned on it. And as a Black Muslim man, a community organizer, a Minnesotan, he shared his story authentically, and that authenticity meant that voters trusted him to fight for them and alongside them. And then he went to Congress and he governed that way. That means showing up for the Fight for 15. I remember standing on picket lines with him, standing with the workers, pushing back really hard when Republicans tried to destroy Social Security. All the times they tried to destroy Social Security, had to do it more than once. It means he relentlessly fought for healthcare access, making things more affordable. So when you run on your values with courage and conviction and share your story as part of the story of the voters of the district and their struggles and their everyday heroism, that is how you build a winning campaign. So once again, that's how we're going to do it. no big deal, right? Those 5 things, these core principles underpin our 2017 strategy. They're the heart of this amazing book, Brown is the New White. I encourage everyone buy it, read it. But it's how we're going to build this government where not just the wealthiest and most privileged have access to lead, but the great breadth and depth of American people. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the amazing Alejandro Chavez, and he'll take it from there.
All right. Well, thank you. I'll be about amazing Alejandro Chavez, but I'll be Alejandro Chavez, that's for sure. Thank you, everybody, for being and listening and hearing all this. A few things. So at this point, we were actually supposed to have Mayor Michael Tubbs join us. Unfortunately, he had something come up where he had to attend a 15-year-old kid's funeral. I told him we would all understand, so he does send his best, and I send our condolences to the family of the fallen boy. But I did want to use this opportunity, since I have the microphone, to share an important story that maybe a lot of people don't know as a key part of history. It's definitely no history book you're going to read, but it's an important piece that defines and kind of explains reflective democracy and gives an example of it. So I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and as Rondell alluded to earlier, my grandfather is Cesar Chavez, the civil rights leader and labor leader. And I'm sure many of you have heard the quote, "Si se puede," yes we can. Well, that actually started in Arizona. And I'll explain to you why, and then this will all make sense. So in 1972, they passed a law in Arizona under a guy named Governor One-Eyed Jack. He had one eye, an eye patch, One-Eyed Jack. And he passed a law making it illegal for farm workers to boycott or picket. They couldn't even stop going to work. We're not talking police officers or firefighters. We're talking the people that pull the food from the soil. We're told that if they stood up for their rights, that they would be in violation of a crime. So when that happened, my grandfather and the crew, the farm workers, they rallied in the car and they drove out here to Arizona from California. And he started a fast. It's one of his several fasts. This one was for 25 days, and it went from mid-May to June. So some of the hottest time of year here in Arizona. And they did not have air conditioners in the barrio back then. And barrio, for those, are the term for Latino Spanish ghettos, if you will, however you want to phrase it, but the barrios. And so he fasted, and all the people came in, the Latino leaders came in, and they told him, "Cesar, why are you fasting? They don't care about you here. They don't care if you're going to die. This isn't California. No se puede in Arizona. It doesn't work. It's not going to work here." And he looked at him after several weeks of fasting, and all he could muster up to say was, "Si se puede." So Dolores Huerta goes out to the crowd, and they ask her, "What is Cesar said? What is he telling us?" And she says, "Cesar says, si se puede." And that's the cry we all know of today. And the reason why I wanted to explain that story to you is because that was not the end of it. What they actually did was they traveled from Yuma, where Mondale was stationed when he was in the military, to Flagstaff, signing and registering people up to vote. It was actually one of the largest voter registrations in the country, and they registered over 150,000 people. It also was one of the years where they changed the age limit where people could vote, so they really focused on young people getting that opportunity. What's most interesting from that, they were able to elect, 2 years later, a man by the name of Raul Castro. He is not Fidel Castro's brother. He was not the governor. This is another Raul Castro, totally separate, who is still to this day the only Latino to serve as the governor of Arizona. We also had a minority leader that year that was Latino. That was the first time. They also had the first Native American serve in the legislature. It was absolutely astonishing what that work did. It allowed them, they weren't able to overturn that law, but they were able to get things like the short hand removed. And they were able to get things for farm workers, such as unemployment. Farm workers weren't allowed unemployment. Now, because of acts like that and Governor Raul Castro and leadership that were able to get elected and represent the people, tools like the shorthand hoe are banned. Things like overtime, well, not overtime always, depending what state you're in, but things like unemployment insurance are now available to farm workers because they had a reflective democracy and they were able to go out there and fight for it. So, I have taken up plenty of time, and we have heard from plenty of us. And now, I'd like to hear from all of you. So, if we can have the questions slide up, that would be fantastic. Awesome. In just a second, you should ask questions right there in that little orange box, or whatever color it is. I'm colorblind, so it could be a red box. But go ahead, make sure you ask questions. We have some come in. And this first one, we're going to give to Mondale. Ooh, keeping you sharp, Mondale. Keeping you sharp here. All right, Mondale. This question comes from, I'm going to remember her name. But Danielle Davies.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned that door and phone conversations all year is one of the principles. And then you mentioned tracking the data and show where your campaign is succeeding. Can you go into that a little bit and explain how it's done?
Yeah, so there are several systems that campaigns are using as it pertains to tracking data and having. Alejandro, can you repeat the first part of that question for me, please?
Yes, it's blah, blah. You mentioned door-to-door conversations all year is one principle.
Yes.
Then
yes.
You mentioned tracking data. Right.
So yes, basically what I'm talking about is door-to-door conversations is what political campaigns call canvassing. Canvassing should not happen 2 weeks before an election if you want to be taken serious as a organization, institution, or a person that is concerned with the values of that community, whichever community you're talking to, especially minority communities, because we are used to campaigns coming around October telling us to go vote for candidates that have not visited us or not speaking messages that relate to us or our needs. So canvassing year-round does a couple things. One, it gives validity to the issue and or the person that's advocating for people's services or needs, or actually if you're trying to get a person's vote, you definitely need to be at their house before 2 weeks before the election, mainly because you can't have an entire platform built on what you think people need if you haven't talked to people. So the purpose of knocking on doors and tracking that data is so you can build a platform that speaks to the needs of the people of the communities and districts you're looking to represent. There's no way better. Science shows this after every election cycle. There's tons of studies done on what was most effective to win over voters, and nothing beats out having conversations at people's door. So if you're having conversations at someone's door year round, you're not only building a relationship with that person, that voter, you're also becoming a part of that community in the sense that you're indulging in what's important to these people at all times. As it pertains to data, a campaign lives or dies by the data. If the data isn't tracked and kept in an efficient way, then basically what you're doing is wasting your time and also the people you're talking to. So most campaigns, progressive campaigns, use a system called Voter Action Network, or VAN for short, to keep data. And what happens is you have conversation with voters at their door, phone, or however you conversate with people, and you track information in the VAN. Now, VAN is a system, so systems are only good as the information you put in them. So you need to make sure before you input VAN data, you've checked or quality assured the data that you're putting in there. But VAN is a system that's managed usually by the state party, the state Democratic Party, and you can get access from them. They have access year-round, so even if a campaign is going on or not, you should be able to talk to them about getting access, either paid or if you're volunteering for them, and getting information from minority communities or any community at all should be a benefit to any party. And if your state party doesn't see it as a benefit from them, that explains why they're losing races.
All right, we have another question here. Actually, it's kind of related, but we will distribute the love between the coaches. So, Annie, you're up next. But it is keeping in Mondale's theme. And this one comes from Rosanna T. I keep hearing about connecting authentically with people who may be on the other side and those who want to be convinced. But I'm having trouble knowing how to approach that and stay authentic while going to the door, where you only have a 10-second window to get a person's attention. Any suggestions, ideas, or strategies?
That is a fantastic question. And I also know that Brianna Fisher, our illustrious other trainer here, has done a lot of this work in her home turf in Texas, really connecting with voters who are coming from potentially a different place. And we have some great trainings on the nuts and bolts of how to do that, but I'll just say a couple quick things. The first thing is to be very friendly actually at the door, right? The greeting when you're saying hello to someone, actually warmly greeting them and being yourself and being a live human that wants to talk to them about decisions that impact their lives is actually a very important, it's a very important foundation. And a strong, friendly, connecting greeting can go a long way. The other thing that is really useful, and lots of the best campaigns provide in advance, is a script so that you don't have to make it up every single time. Repetition is really key. Echoing a message. They say a voter needs to hear a message about 7 times before they really remember it. And I think some of the data on that is evolving, right? But you need to make sure that the story you're telling of the campaign and the candidate is consistent and that you don't have to make it up every single time. So writing up a script in partnership with the candidates and campaigns is pretty good, practicing it a few times. And then I think the last thing I'll say on this one is that facts are important, but people don't hold on to lots of statistics and figures. People hold on to the stories about you, that why you're called to do this work, what your struggles are, why you don't want Medicaid, the Medicaid expansion to be overturned, why you are really worried about the mortgage crisis, what it means to have an exploding student debt crisis to make it impossible for people to get a higher education without going into horrifying debt. Those stories, why you're called to do this work, are more effective than any pie chart or statistic. So I would hold on to that and listen to them when they tell you your story.
Annie, I think you should talk about deep canvassing too, because the person that asked the question thought that you only have 10 seconds. You should probably talk a little bit about deep canvassing as well.
That's a great idea. Yes. So deep canvassing are it's kind of a new word for a thing that has historically been around for a long time to make social change. I think we named, put some extra stuff on a tool that has been an organizer's toolbox for a really long time. From farm workers to the civil rights movement, a lot of the most amazing change has come because people showed up on each other's doorsteps, had a conversation about values, listened to the other people, asked them some questions like, where are you at on a scale of 1 to 10 about how you're feeling about this election, right? And then listen to them. So we can share some of the deep canvassing scripts more. We're going to post up a bunch of the tools and tips at democracyforamerica.com/night school. We have old night schools that actually go into some of the nuts and bolts of that. But that's a bit more of the definition of deep canvassing. The conversations that you have towards the final push in an election should really be get out the vote conversations, because towards the very end, you want to have persuaded the folks that you're going to persuade, mobilize a lot of the folks and welcome them into the electorate. And then in the final push, you want to only be really talking to folks that you know are supportive, and you just got to get them to the polls. Those conversations are typically a little bit shorter than a deep canvassing conversation. So, right.
All right. And there are people coming in with questions. Some of them are answering redundantly. So this one asked, how can we win over independents and get their support? Some deep canvassing is some of it tracking the data so you know who's who. So you're not just going and sending a person who's never volunteered before to a person who does not agree with you and that you're trying to win over, that you send an experienced volunteer. I I do want to expand the spectrum of questions. So, Diane, if I get a chance, I will come back because you are running for office, and I do want to make sure that town council, so we will connect you. You can send us an email to nightschool@democracyforamerica.com if you're running, and we'll connect you with the staff that runs those elections. Okay, this next one is Brianne Fisher. You want to take a question? You up for it? All right. Okay. I see very serious attack on women's rights, religious freedoms, including atheists, as well as minority groups, as well as minorities from these groups of Republicans and administration. How are we going to ensure the Democratic platform covers all of these groups?
That's a great question. And part of why we are talking about building a reflective democracy at this moment, in order for the platform to reflect the needs and the, I'm trying to think out loud, but in order for our platform to represent the needs of minorities, we're going to need more minorities who actually have influence over the platform. And that means elected officials, even down to the smallest elected official that you can think of, your precinct chair. You get your precinct chair in, who is a minority or who has a very deep connection to gender rights issues, they will be able to trickle that up from the top. It doesn't come or from the bottom up, which is very important because those are the ones that are connected to the grassroots, and those are the ones that can build the army that we need to talk to the heads of the Democratic Party. That's my answer.
Great answer.
It's true.
Perfect.
Yep.
Exactly. Okay, so let me go through a couple more questions here. What other elections will DFA be working on? So we have a lot of city council elections. We have a lot of state elections. We have special elections. I would say make sure you're always checking our emails because we let you know when we endorse. And you can always go to our Democracy for America page. There's an endorsement page where that's everybody who's endorsed. What was the
right now? I think Ruby would say DFA endorses everything from dog catcher to president.
President. Very, very true. And I'll just add, on this one, you can see I got the map behind me. I don't know if you can see all my sticky notes. There's a lot. There's 38 governor's races that are up in 2018. There are 10 states where there's a Democratic incumbent senator where Trump won the election. And there are leaders running for mayor right now that are game changers. We just endorsed Yvette Simpson running for office in Cincinnati. Really excited about her. Asia Brown running in Compton. She's the sitting Democratic mayor, and she's been really transforming a whole bunch of important things. So we have an election every single Tuesday in April.
Every Tuesday.
So again, you can go to our website. You can email us at endorsements@democracyforamerica.com, and you can see the application there to get our endorsement. And I'm going to encourage all of you to, spread that application far and wide to candidates that you're excited about, or to yourself if you are a candidate.
Alejandro, I know you want to answer more questions, which is what you should want to do. But I want to mention one thing. Next year, we have, let me say, I spent 2 minutes and 12 seconds talking about district attorneys. Next year, we have more than 1,100 district attorney elections in this country. 1,100. And these races normally go unnoticed. People don't challenge the incumbent. People, if we are to change what's happening to our black brothers and sisters, brown brothers and sisters, Native brothers and sisters as it pertains to police overreach, killing, and all of the other things that are unjust, then this is where we start. So you should be taking a look at those races as if your life depends on it, because someone that's a person of color that you care about, life does depend on it.
Mondell, we actually have a question directly for you, so I guess I will give it to you. This is from Ebony Johnson Cooper. It says, Mondell, can you talk a little bit more about the importance of candidates engaging with black and brown communities? Any best practices?
Yes, the best practice is don't wait till 2 weeks before the election. And the second practice is don't come in with your newly sorrowed soul trying to tell black and brown people what's best for them. Go in listening to these people. Black and brown people know or have remedies for oppression because we've lived through it, and we live through it on a daily basis forever. So if you go in listening and actively listening, you will come out offended if you're a white candidate, privilege, rightfully so. But you will also come out a better person and also a more productive and also ready to win candidate. So the best thing I can offer you is use your ears more than your mouth. If you are a candidate absent the oppression that we suffer as people of color. And when you go into these communities, if you go in listening with a real and not judgmental approach, you'll come out a better candidate.
All right, this one will go to Annie, and this is from Robin Richards. When we are telling our story, how can we remain on point when the pain of the tale impairs the ability to express campaign points?
Oh, wow. That is a powerful question, and I think, well, one, you should share stories. You can be a compelling leader and share a personal story without having to share stories of trauma if you don't want to. That's not what makes a powerful leader necessarily. It can, but you should make sure that you're ready to share where you're at. And the next thing I'll say is practicing it. In that organizing and campaigning is a beautiful art and science, and we can get better at it over time. So being able to practice a story, and we have actually, again, on our night school website, which is democracyforamerica.com/night school, a workshop on actually being able to practice telling that story. You know, what choices you faced, what challenges you faced, and what possibility and hope came from the outcome. So, yeah, I think I would make sure to be ready to tell the story, practice it, and use some of those sort of principles to stay grounded in the interaction. And as Mondel said, a lot of these interactions are about 30% you reaching out and talking and 70% listening to the voter. So, all right.
Okay. Here's a, sorry. Okay. Okay, we will actually, let's give this one to Annie again. Annie, this comes from Emmanuel Kidd. I hope I said that right, Emmanuel Kidd. Could you give me some advice on raising support among my demographic, the white working class, in support of racial and economic justice? I'm sick and tired of people using this as attack dogs against our minority brothers and sisters. I want to make a statement for our dignity, that we're not all a bunch of racist degenerates, but I also don't want to take away from the spotlights from minorities raising activities.
That's a great question and an ongoing tension, and I think that's why we have to do both. If we are building campaigns, if we want to build progressive power, building racial and economic justice is always inextricable, and anybody who's trying to divvy up white working people and scapegoat people of color, or say that it's impossible to connect on those values, is going to be setting all of us up to not make real progress on the most urgent issues that we face. So that is a big and powerful question. I would love if my other fellow trainers and moderators had other thoughts on that. But I think that the key thing is to not run away from racial justice as a value, because some voters are are unpersuadable. Some voters are always going to be opposing the things that we need to fight for. So we got to fight them. But there are a lot of voters that have been abandoned and have never had a conversation with someone that cares about these things and never had an ad that speaks to these values. You know, we just played big in Kansas. A lot of those voters haven't heard a progressive talking point around fighting corporations that are robbing you of your health care in a long time. So if we abandon districts and voters and leave them only to people that are preaching hate and violence, we're not providing an alternative. So that's why the 50-state strategy is so important. But voters are better than a lot of the conventional wisdom thinks that they are.
The other piece I'll add in is using the Kansas example. Look, Kansas, Wichita, let's be honest, they don't have a high African-American population. They don't have a very high Latino population. James Thompson was a civil rights attorney. One of the things he did was sue police departments for their abuse of power. On his website, he talked about immigration reform. Like, I can tell you this from a lot of campaigns I've worked on. Once you get past New Mexico, once you get past New Mexico and stay out of Texas, a lot of candidates don't talk about immigration. It's just something they try to draw attention to. So that's an example of a white male, James Thompson from Kansas, who actually ran on values that said civil rights, you know, the criminalization, the student to prison pipeline, which we know impacts a lot of Black and Latino men and women. He ran on immigration. These were centerpiece platforms for him in a place that a lot of candidates don't do that. And he came within 6 points of winning without any National Democratic Party support. So I just want to give you an example, too, of where it's important, because it's not just about you, Noel, talking. It's actually about having the candidates doing this front and center. And that's where we get to push them as people that work on their campaigns, people that strategize. Okay, we are going to take one last question because I'm way over time, and then I'm going to wrap us up. So this question is actually a great transition from what I was talking about, and I will leave it to Mondale. I know Mondale's got a great, he's going to love this question I'm throwing up. Mondale, how effective can these campaigns be if the Democratic Party does not want to support the candidates these people relate to?
This question actually isn't important. It shows a lack of completion in my presentation, because what I should have started with was the fact that the Democratic Party does not support these issues, and also the ability of these campaigns to win is so important. It's vital. A great example, Alejandro, I know we're short on time, but let me just give this example, and I'm going to numb it down as quickly as possible. In 2015, I want everyone, if you have time, to please go search Scott Cologne. Scott Cologne is a first-term Democratic candidate. In 2015 he was. Now he's a district attorney. He beat a 27-year white incumbent in northern Mississippi. He outperformed him in every district in northern Mississippi to become the first Black district attorney. And this happened because the Democratic Party wasn't invested in Scott Cologne, but outside people believed in him. And Scott said, I'm going to expand the electorate by talking to people of color in my district that are sporadic voters, people that are considered low information voters. And he won. He won big. He won all 5 counties. And now he's doing progressive things in the district attorney seat. This is not a one-off thing. We know when people are loud and progressive about values, with or without the Democratic Party, we win. So I say, be loud and progressive, talk to people that the Democratic Party tell you not to, and you'll bring the Democratic Party along screaming. and the party will be better off because of it. Let's get some rest, y'all. Take it over, Alan.
All right, Mondale, you're lucky that we're here, so I'll let you keep going. We're here, brother. We're here. All right, so let me wrap everybody up here with this last little bit. For those of you who have not been with us before, and for those of you who have, a quick reminder that tomorrow we actually have a virtual open office hours. You can bring your lunch. It's at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We go for about an hour. There'll be Mondale, maybe me, a couple other staffers, and it's a real informal conversation. Look, we know there's a lot of questions here. We also know that some of you had follow-up questions that we're just not able to get to in a one-to-one scenario. This is that opportunity. Bring your lunch to the virtual office. I'll have my lunch. Mondale will have his lunch. It'll be like we're in a room eating together, and we'll definitely take questions. You're welcome to pop in and ask one question and then leave, or you're welcome to stay and hang out and hear what other people have to say. 'Cause I know a lot of times other people's questions are your questions. Someone just asked it first. And if you'd like to find a recording for this training and the slides, the slides are currently available. The recording will be available shortly. And that is a very simple link, democracyforamerica.com/night school. Once again, democracyforamerica.com/night school. Also, we have another exciting thing for everybody. We are so thrilled to be building the resistance with all of you. But in order for each of us to be able to do our best work that we can for justice, it's necessary that we build a strong local community and that we have real conversations about what we need to do. That's why on Thursday, April 20th, DFA members are gathering to watch a double feature, Immigrants for Sale and Pursuing the Dream, a documentary. Now, these are just combined about 45 minutes, so don't think it's super long. Both films combined are about 45 minutes. And they illustrate the far-reaching impacts of immigration policy and demonstrate the urgent need for us to support the organizing of our immigrant brothers and sisters. Now, to attend a screening or see one, you'll see the link right there in front of you. I don't want to repeat it in case I say it wrong and you're like, Alejandro, why did you say the wrong link? I couldn't find it. So it's right there. And for those of you who download the slides, it will also be in the slide. A quick little tip on where you can find links that you saw on the slides. That's how we put it available. And last piece, night school. We'll have another night school on building reflective democracy that talks about building a voter target. A lot of the stuff that Annie was talking about, that will be Thursday, May 11th. So, with no further ado, I want to say thank you to Mondale. I want to say thank you to Brianne. Thank you to Annie. I want to also say thank you to Miles and Mary, who are also on this call, making sure the slides work and that you can see us and hear us and that none of us broke down. And with that, I say good night, everybody, and thank you. Appreciate it, everybody. Thank you for inviting me into your house.
Easy.